So I'm Benny from Ireland, and I studied electronic engineering originally in university, but after I graduated, I started traveling. That got me inspired to learn languages along the way. So the first, to get into languages, the first thing I did was I moved to Spain after I graduated, and I originally thought just living in the country would magically make me speak the language, and I was wrong. I was there for 6 months, and I didn't really learn much Spanish because I was speaking English with everybody, and I was trying to study, but I didn't have a very good learning approach. But then after those 6 months, I had talked to enough people who had successfully learned the language to see that I just wasn't truly dedicating myself to it. And that's when I decided to have a more focused speak from day one approach, and I was okay with making mistakes, and that completely transformed my language learning story. For me, a language, I'm not necessarily passionate about learning the languages. The languages themselves are a tool for me to be able to open doors, to meet new people, and to explore new cultures. So I like the process of learning languages in that it gives me some extra ability to communicate. And it's always been like that for me, and that's reflected in the way I've learned that I'm more okay with making mistakes, I think, than somebody who's passionate about the language itself, because for me, communication has always been the main focus. I would say I can confidently speak maybe 7 or 8 languages, and then I've dabbled in quite a lot more, but I wouldn't be able to defend myself very well in those languages. Mostly Romance languages, so Spanish, Italian, French, Brazilian, Portuguese, and then as well as English, I also have Irish, and I learned some American Sign Language, enough to get into conversations with that, and Esperanto, and those would be my best ones. And then I have a bunch of others that would be lower levels that I kind of on and off can and can't include them in my list depending on how recently I've been practicing. So I have traveled a total of 14 years straight, where I would travel with everything I own in the world. And for the first 6 or 7 years, I wasn't really documenting my travels. It was just for my own learning experience. And I was improving my language learning approach. But people kept telling me I'm so smart that I'm learning these languages, and I strongly disagree with them. I did very poorly in languages in school, and I actually got so frustrated in having to explain, no, I failed, I had a problem learning Spanish initially, and it's my approach that's changed, that I started the blog to document future language learning projects and share them with other people so they could see the mystery behind the curtain, as it were. And my first project was like learning Czech, and part of my philosophy is specificity, having a specific target in a specific timeline. So it's not necessarily about fluency in particular in 3 months in particular, just that represents the kind of project people should be ultimately aiming for. Maybe you want to have conversational Spanish in 4 months. Whatever it is, you need some specifics. And that's where the title of the blog came from, was some of my projects have been based on learning fluency, and it's been around 3 months because when I travel, 3 months tends to be the tourist visa limit. Simple as that. So there's no magic formula that makes 3 months special. It just was part of my specificity, and people enjoyed following that story, and the blog grew very quickly. And now I've made a business out of it, and I use it to try to inspire people to learn languages themselves. At the moment, the blog has about just under 1 million visitors per month, and the YouTube channel is just over 80,000 subscribers. And I've got all sorts of other ways that I get through to people, but I kind of, because I was doing it for such a long time in the travel side, I followed a lot of travel bloggers, and I learned from them So rather than, I know for a lot of people who blog, maybe they try to blog just for their parents to follow their travels. But I did have a strategy from the beginning. I wanted to make a difference with my blog. I wanted to get a story out there to as many people as possible. So I never knew how much it would grow. I didn't expect for it to be a major source of income for me because it wasn't really for business purposes that I started, but I did genuinely want it to grow, to make a difference and to inspire people. So because I come from a background of studying electronic engineering, the latest technology trends have always been something I find very interesting. And I've always tried to see how can I use current technology in ways maybe people have not considered to inspire people to learn languages. And it's understanding the back end of things like my blog have been part of the reason I've had success with it. So when I was thinking about what I'd talk about at Langfest, I realized that recently one of my passions has been using live streaming technology and using multi-layered streams, and it's kind of not something a lot of people know about, or they know about it from indirect ways, like watching people stream themselves playing video games. And I see that this has a lot of potential to then influence the language learning space. And that's what I want to do. I want to discuss a few of the things I've discovered and a few of the ways I see the potential language classroom of the future depending on this technology, and hopefully benefiting the next generation that really relies on it and understands it, and it would need to fit in with that way of thinking if it wants to get their attention. Any time you use anything like your smartphone or an app or a computer, it's generally going to have an internet connection, and that's got a lot of potential to distract you. And I know I've personally wanted to sit down and study my language, but then I've ended up on Facebook or I've looked through Wikipedia and hours get wasted. So I think that is a major problem, but ultimately the problem isn't with the technology itself. The problem is with how we use the technology. So I've really considered these things. I've considered what the next generation needs to maintain their attention, what they find entertaining, that's different to what I found entertaining when I was growing up. And I'm really trying to understand that and apply it to what things can do to adapt, instead of, I think a mistake too many people make is try to be too traditionalist and say they need to put their phones away, they need to focus on the books. That's all well and good if that's the way that you like learning, but that's going to create negative associations, and I think we have to kind of embrace the technology, both the positives and the negatives, and see how can we channel it in the right direction. And that's something I'm very passionate about, and I think there is a danger, but it's in how we use it, not in the technology evolving itself. So it was interesting for me, the concept of publishing books, because I struggled with that idea since I'm more about online blogging, YouTubing. But ultimately, there are still people who you can make such a big impact in their way of thinking if you can get a physical book in bookshops. And this is why I worked with Teach Yourself to create a course that combined the encouraging advice that I like to give with their experience of over a century of making academically sound courses. And it was a struggle for me. It was a very difficult process to try to make these two things match or mix together, because I like to encourage people to make mistakes. And that's not something that works very functionally in a classroom environment, because one of the purposes is to avoid those mistakes to get a higher mark. So it was an interesting process, but we managed to find a good balance. And so far we've got language hacking Spanish, French, German and Italian. And we're working on more that'll be coming out over the next years. And I'm really glad I was given the opportunity to work with them and to maybe influence a little bit the direction that language education might go in. I like to stay on top of all of the news in the polyglot world that I possibly can. I'm always on social media and trying to follow my friends' channels. And I remember when the original name of the Polyglot Symposium was announced, long before they reached out to me, I had already heard about it through people talking. And so it already had this reputation. It already seemed like it was the kind of thing a lot of very interesting people were going to want to go to. So when they offered for me to come and give a speech, then it was a lot easier to say yes, because I already could see that it's going in the right direction in terms of helping the language learning community get together. And I'm really glad I went to the first event, and of course the name then changed the next year, and I enjoy coming to Langfest. I enjoy the people here, and it's a really well run event.